Hello, my name is JD Pluecker, and I'm going to do a short presentation about my project, the Unsettlements, and the work I've been doing with it. The presentation is called Unsettling the Settlements and Making the Unmade. Today, I'll start with this quote by Cecilia Vicuña. Un objeto no es un objeto, es el testigo de una relación. An object is not an object. It is the witness to a relationship. Today, I'll start with two monuments that perhaps will give a sense of the ground on which I'm working. What is a monument and what does it allow to come into being? The huge, towering white monument to Sam Houston on the road north out of the city named for him into Huntsville. This monument, perhaps the opposite of all the work that I'm doing. What this Sam Houston monument creates is a way of understanding history and the present that allows this other structure to exist. This is the Walls unit in Huntsville, just up the road, the death row for the Texas Department of Corrections. What this monument allows is this other disaster, this other architecture of tragedy, this other territory of grief. Today, I'll start with this second monument, the towering obelisk at the San Jacinto battlefield, where Texian forces vanquished the Mexican army of Santa Anna. What is allowed by this monument? The monument lays the groundwork for the steady environmental disaster of life all around it. The Deer Park fire, the days the bayou is lit aflame and burns and burns. At the base of that tower is a museum of Texas history that you have to pay to enter. At the top of that tower is a small museum display that dramatizes and celebrates the history of the ship channel and the refineries lining it, the plastic industry and its giants, the environmental degradation of the present moment, literally atop the base of settler wars of conquest. Today, I'll start with the Dion Brand quote. Home suggests order and routine, tradition, family. Someone else's order struck me as fascinating, truthfully suffocating. It was as if they said there was no more about the world to happen, no more to know. Today, I'll start years ago with that time when I compiled a variety of glossaries of Karankawa language found in the journals of colonial linguists and assorted settler agents into an Excel spreadsheet. I'll start, I thought, by making an accordion book and painting over the words in English and Spanish with a mixture of paint and sand from Buffalo Bayou. That untranslated glossary ended up in my book, Ford Over. Eventually, I stenciled letters onto the floor of a row house with a friend to spell out those words in soil. Today, I'll start by passing on the knowledge shared with me by Carrizo Comecrudo elder Juan Mancias, that the ground we walk on is composed of indigenous dead, Karankawa dead. The earth is ancestor, ancestor is earth. Today, I'll start by recognizing the earth beneath us is full of bodies, by recognizing that the narrative of these other two monuments ignores the bodies in the soil. Today, I'll start with this begonia I grew from cuttings, given to me by my dad, given to him by his mother, Hertha, who lived in a house blocks away from my own, in the same East End in Houston, by the confluences of the bayous so-called Brays and Buffalo, bayou ghosts, begonia ghosts. Today, let me start with this begonia. The begonia is teaching me how to write thought through the connection between hookups and ancestors, a kind of writing that curls like the rhizomes of the begonia plant, ever trying to escape from its pot. The same plant surviving, trundling on, its mystery and its secrets. Today, I'll start by saying that 5 years ago, I was trying to figure out how to be a person, building something, not necessarily in opposition to those two monuments, but with a different relationship to history, to space, to place. Over the last 5 years, I've identified 17 sites so far that relate to my father and mother's lives and the lives of our ancestors. 17 sites of violence or witness, trauma or colonization, promise or loss. I brought my body into those spaces many times over the last 5 years to visit them, to orient and reorient myself to them and to their objects and rhythms and stories. I continually return, recreating an initial return, transforming my life into a commitment to live in relation to these spaces and the people who traverse them. I've done a lot of things in these sites, sometimes making photographs and little videos, and other times writing, but most often borrowing objects from the site, objects thought of as trash or as naturally occurring in the spaces. I then arrange and rearrange those materials in my studio and in the 2 gallery shows that I've done. I photograph those arrangements and often draw them. I made these little anti-monuments and anti-markers to stories unknown and untold. I took different approaches to my father's stories and my mother's. My working class dad from the East End of Houston by the refineries, with all of his ambiguities and intensities and silences around sexuality and activism, yearning and repression, struggle and witness. My middle-class mom, daughter of a doctor on the West Side, saddled with the expectations of her class, gender, and race. My mom with her Ancestry.com membership and a desire to keep the peace and evade conflict. As Sarah Ahmed says, what you come into contact with is shaped by what you do. Bodies are orientated when they are occupied in time and space. Bodies are shaped by this contact with objects. Alongside these installations and these relationships with sites, I've been making book objects. 2 chapbooks arrived, Hooks and Swamp's Fly. For the project with my dad, I took all my notes and the digital detritus and translated them into a book that sat in the closet of the exhibition and in the turning pages of a video I made. Eventually, I'd print copies of the book to share. Today, I'll start by returning to Dion Brand. Too much has been made of origins. Today, I'll start by trying to push back on the idea of blood lineage, by trying to imagine my way out of the branches of the damned family tree. I wrote a manuscript out of the collision of those 2 chapbooks, called it The Every Wild. Sparks flew, something like this. This sister, difficult on these words, neediness of waterways, history, everything, body, the family, willing, gender be, slipped. All was sensation, flooding, giant, marshes, flowers, coast, glisten on, never, narrative through water, solid, like words once. Today, I'll start by saying I asked my dyke mom, a lesbian woman who had cradled me in care at a time after I came out to my parents and they could not support me. She had been asking me for years to put together a book of her poetry, and it occurred to me in one moment to ask if we could do an Unsettlements project together. That invitation and her enthusiasm has been life-changing for both of us. Unlike my mother and my father, my dyke mom's archive of documents and photographs is extensive. The sheer amount of materials that she has passed on to me is huge and expansive. Today, I'll start with these more recent embroidery pieces I began to do last year. Embroidery, a practice of both of my moms at different parts of their lives and for different reasons. I have been worrying about whether I can or should be making anything plastic. Plastic as in molded and shaped. that older meaning of the word plastic. At one site along Carpenter Road in Humble, Texas, I find the ditches full of strange little structures made of dirt or dust, but they look like drip castles I made as a kid at the beach. I pick up the little castles and fill boxes with them, take them home, and then to the object poem in the gallery dedicated to that site. My dyke mom scolds me, asks me how I could steal their houses. I laugh her recriminations off, but the truth is, I don't know what effect this has on the crawfish. I need to research, I say, but just like all the other materials, my commitment is to take them back when I'm done. All the materials have to go back. No extraction. Today, I'll start with the two monuments to the disaster and all the attendant destruction they allow. I'll make present the grief they occasion in me, as if the grief might be a power. As Bayo Okomolafe says, what if grief is the invitation and not the impediment? What if we're being called to do other things with our times, with our bodies, with our senses? These object poems and building a relationship with these sites have been other things to do with my time, my body, my senses. I feel more alive in these moments than I do almost any other time. There's a happiness to the attention, to the building and rebuilding of a relationship, to a littered track of road with abandoned lots and scrub on all sides, to a cemetery with views of the Port of Houston and refinery towers. Today, then, I'll start with this image I redrew from my dyke mom's first journal in the early 1970s. She sketched out a set of 3 clouds in blue satin, one with an embroidered rainbow and beads hanging from it like rain, a trio, a change coming, a day of rain and rainbows. She never made it herself, the image lingering in her journal for 50 years, an unrealized dream, a kind of small imagining I came across in her journals. Last year, I made this trio of clouds with the help of my godmother in San Antonio. A return, then, another kind of monument. This object is a witness to a relationship. What might this object, or dare I say, this monument, allow to come into being in the world? Today, I'll start with that question. What might this object, or dare I say, this monument, allow to come into being in the world? Thank you.